This story starts back in 2017, when Thorne and I first started living together. Rent in our country had been ridiculous for years, and after months of searching for something even remotely affordable, we finally made the decision to emigrate. Not far, just across the border to the neighboring country. Our college was close enough to make the commute manageable, and the cost of living there was shockingly lower. It felt like the kind of decision people make in a movie, spontaneous but smart, a leap that seemed worth taking. It took months of scrolling listings, visiting strange little flats with moldy corners or neighbors who stared too long, but eventually we found it. The apartment. It used to be the hay attic of a farmhouse, but a wealthy couple, Mr. and Lady Viral, had converted the attic into a self-contained unit years earlier, while turning the rest of the house into their own home. The place was all slanted ceilings and exposed beams, with a huge triangular window at the front that looked out over a field. It felt kind of magical, rustic but cozy. We signed the rental agreement and moved in September 2017. At first, everything was great. We liked Mr. Viral and his wife, even if they were a bit eccentric. Lady Viral would carry her cat around in a baby sling and talk to it like it was a reincarnated poet. Mr. Viral was always telling long, strange stories about the history of the land or the spirits in the walls. We just smiled and nodded. They were weird, sure, but mostly harmless. Or so we thought. It didn't stay harmless. The first real sign that things were off was the music. Mr. Viral would blast it at all hours of the night. Not just a little loud, like Shake the Walls loud. Opera sometimes. Other times it was bizarre electronic drone music that sounded like a spaceship dying. It would go on for hours, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and if we knocked on his door or texted him, he either didn't respond or came up with some excuse about testing the acoustics or tuning the room. Then there was the maintenance. If we asked him to fix something, like when the bathroom light started flickering, he'd show up in the middle of the night, tools in hand, knocking until we let him in. Once, he came at 2:17 a.m. with a drill and a headlamp, ready to go. When we told him it wasn't urgent, he just laughed and said, "There's no time like the now." He loved to brag about how he'd kicked out the previous tenants. "They told me the rent was too high," he said once with this smug grin. "So I raised it and gave them a week's notice. You'd be amazed how quickly people can pack." He said it like he was proud. The worst, though, were the rats. We heard them first, scratching in the ceiling. Then came the holes, little ones that led straight outside. That's when we asked him to do something about it. His solution? Expanding foam. Except he didn't just seal the holes. He used the foam to trap the rats inside. Alive. We didn't realize it until the smell hit. It was like death had taken up residence above us. Worse, it didn't go away. Days passed, then a week. The rats had died in the ceiling, and they stayed there, decomposing. When we brought it up, he just shrugged and said, "That's nature's way." Then he started knocking on our door. Not once or twice, not politely. He'd knock for minutes at a time. If we didn't answer, he'd go outside and stand under our window, yelling our names. "I know you're up there. I can see the light, you know." It didn't matter what time it was. Once he did it at 6:30 in the morning. Another time, midnight. He'd just shout until we opened the door or he got tired. And then it escalated. One evening, I got home from the gym. Sweaty, exhausted, just wanting a shower. I walked straight into the bathroom, which was just left of the entrance. Nothing seemed off. I wrapped myself in a towel and headed to the living room, and that's when the front door opened. Like it just opened, and there was Mr. Viral, standing there in his stupid suede slippers and wool cardigan. I screamed, obviously. He didn't flinch. "I left my key in your apartment," he said, like that explained everything. I stared at him. "You used the key to get in just now." He looked at me like I was the one being weird. "Right, but I'd left it here earlier. I needed it back." I was standing there in a towel, dripping water on the hardwood floor. He didn't even look embarrassed. Just turned around and left. No apology, no explanation. Just gone. That's when it finally clicked. We weren't just dealing with a weird landlord. We were dealing with someone who didn't understand, or didn't care about, boundaries. Someone who thought of the apartment as still his. And us. We were just temporary guests in his space. We decided it was time to leave. Around that time, the Virals told us they were moving to Poland. They were selling the property, and a new landlord was taking over. We met the new guy once. He was worse. He talked about converting the attic into an Airbnb, and asked if we could leave the furniture behind to make it more authentic. That was the final straw. We told Mr. Viral we were moving out. He nodded and said, Well, if you're going, you can return my camera. We laughed. Thought he was kidding. He wasn't. After he left, the air in the apartment felt weird, like something had shifted. We couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Return my camera. It echoed in my head. I looked around the living room, nothing obvious. But then Thorne mentioned the beams. The ceiling was high and pointed, like a church. There were horizontal beams across the top, and we'd never really looked at them closely. We got the ladder. There it was. A tiny black camera, nestled on the beam, aimed straight at our living room. It was small, one of those models that blends into shadows. I almost threw up. Thorne climbed down, grabbed wire cutters, and cut the cable. As soon as he snipped it, something else happened. One of the Wi-Fi networks we'd always seen in our list disappeared. It was called Cam Network. We'd never known what it was. It had always been there, always strong. Now it was gone. We just stared at each other. We packed that night. Didn't even wait for the lease to end. We just left. We thought about pressing charges, but Mr. Viral had a great lawyer. He bragged about it once. She's the reason I never get sued, he'd said. Anyway, he was already long gone by then. Somewhere in Poland. No recourse. No justice. Just silence. We told our friends. Some of them laughed, like it was a funny story about a crazy landlord. But others? They were scared. Especially when one couple we knew said they were looking at a place across the border, managed by someone named Viral. It's a common name, sure, but still. Makes you wonder. I think about that camera sometimes. I think about how long it was up there. About everything it might have recorded. I think about all the times we watched movies, danced like idiots, argued, cried, kissed. All under the eye of that camera. I think about how we didn't know. And I think about Mr. Viral's voice, echoing up from beneath the window. I know you're up there. I hope we never meet again. This happened years ago, back when I was 24 and working at a small local TV station. It was one of my first real jobs out of college, and I was still figuring out how to adult. My name's Kess, and every Friday night, me and my coworker Joran had a little tradition. Meet up at the Hollow Tap Room after our shift, grab a few drinks, and play some pool. Neither of us were pool sharks or anything, but Joran was better than I was. He had this smooth, calculated way of shooting, and if I had enough beer in me, sometimes I'd get into a groove and surprise him. It was casual fun, something to look forward to after a long week. The Hollow Tap Room was a 2-level bar, main floor upstairs, with the more low-key pool table area in the basement. The basement had this worn-out, smoky vibe even though no one smoked inside anymore. Dim lighting, old arcade machines that didn't work anymore, and one pool table tucked in the back. That night started like any other. We got there around 8:30, ordered a couple beers, and headed downstairs. It was dead. Nobody else around, which was perfect. We played a few one-on-one games. I won one by luck, Joran took the next two. We laughed, trash-talked a little, and kept the drinks flowing. The usual way pool worked at the Hollow was simple. Someone puts a quarter on the table to call next game. Winner stays, loser pays. If you kept winning, you kept playing for free. We were about to start another round when two guys came down the stairs. The first guy looked like he was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, tall, lean but wiry, with a shaved head and an energy that was hard to read. The other was shorter, kind of stocky, quieter. The tall one, Rook, did all the talking. Mind if we get next game? He asked. Sure, yeah, Joran said, nodding toward the table. Just toss up a quarter. They did, and we played one more round. When we were done, they set up. We played them as a team, me and Joran against Rook and the quiet guy. And we wiped the floor with them. That's when the tone shifted. Rook didn't take the loss well. He started muttering, clearly annoyed. Something about a bad break, how the table was warped. We tried to keep it light, crack some jokes, offered to play again. Yeah, Rook said, but we shouldn't have to pay again. We'll split it. That's not how it works here, Joran said, still polite. Losers pay. Rook looked at us like he was trying to decide whether to throw a punch or just walk away. After a long pause, he grumbled, pulled out quarters, and paid. We played again. Same result. We won. Now he was mad. He slammed his cue down, cursing under his breath. You guys think you're hot, huh? He said, voice raised, eyes locked on me. I didn't respond. Neither did Joran. We just kept lining up the next shot. But then something strange happened. Rook's rage faded. It was like a switch flipped. His posture relaxed. He laughed, too loud, too sudden. You guys are all right, he said. Just playing around. I get too competitive. We nodded, wary. But we didn't leave. In hindsight, we should have. They kept paying. We kept winning. Rook started doing this weird thing where he'd stand too close, like right in my personal space. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then he started touching me. A hand on the shoulder, a pat on the back, a too long grip when handing over the cue. "Love your shirt," he said at one point. It was just a green plaid shirt. Nothing special. "Seriously, man, that's a great shirt." "Thanks," I said, trying to edge away. "You get it local? Or like online or something?" "No idea. Had it for a while." He nodded, like that was a deeply satisfying answer. A few rounds later, I was lining up a shot when I felt him come up behind me. He grabbed the collar of my shirt and yanked it back. Not hard, just enough to pull it away from my neck. "Gotta see the size," he said, too close to my ear. I jerked away. "Dude, what the hell?" He laughed again, that same unsettling laugh. "Relax, man. Just curious." I looked over at Joran. He gave me a look that said, "We need to go." "We're grabbing another beer," Joran said. "Be right back." We never went back down. We left through the side exit. Didn't even finish our drinks. By Monday, I'd mostly shaken it off. Creepy guy, weird interaction, whatever. I had work to focus on. That week, I was doing cheer-in operations, basically running the live graphics during the news broadcast. Lower thirds, over-the-shoulder images, full-screen graphics, all my responsibility. I'd missed the morning meeting that day, so I didn't know what the lineup of stories was. I was just prepping the visuals, getting everything cued. Then I opened the folder for crime graphics. Mugshots. I clicked on a file, and there he was, Rook, staring back at me from the screen. At first, my brain didn't register it. I just froze. The same face, the same buzzed hair, the same eyes. I clicked into the run sheet, my hands trembling. He'd stabbed someone. In the parking lot of the Hollow Tap Room. The night after we saw him. Apparently, he'd gotten into another fight over the pool table. This time, it ended with someone in the hospital. They survived, but just barely. I sat there, staring at the mugshot, replaying everything in my head. The way he touched me. The way he smiled. The way he tried to get too close. How easily things could have gone differently. If we'd stayed one game longer. If we'd gone outside for air. If we'd pissed him off just a little more. Later that day, I told Joran. He just stared at me, silent for a full minute. Then he said, "I knew something was off about that guy." We never went back to the Hollow. I still think about that night more than I should. It's been years, but sometimes I'll see someone in a bar, too close, too friendly, and I'll feel it again. That fine line between harmless and dangerous. The way you can't always tell until it's too late. Rook, if you're still out there, let's never, ever meet again. This happened after my second year of college, during the summer when everything felt too loud and too fast, and I just wanted to get away. My best friend, Saf, and I had been eyeing this off-grid Airbnb for weeks, one of those minimalist yurts out in the desert, the kind of place that promised peace and quiet and a break from the world. It wasn't our usual travel style, but something about it felt right. Different. Like a reset. So we booked it. The yurt was located out in Wonder Valley, California, a beautifully desolate patch of sand and sun not far from Joshua Tree. The listing was vague. 10 minutes from the road, it said, follow the tires, then the fork. There wasn't a formal address. It gave us directions like turn at the 2 stacked tires, continue for a mile, then veer north at the Joshua Tree with the twisted arm. I should have known then that this was more of an adventure than a vacation. But we were excited. The pictures showed a cozy round yurt with a fire pit, solar lights, and a hammock stretched between 2 spindly desert trees. Inside, it was simple, just a bed, a table, a few chairs, and a propane stove. No electricity, no running water, no neighbors. The first night was perfect. We arrived just before sunset, dusty and tired from the drive, but immediately enchanted. The desert was beautiful in a way I hadn't expected. Quiet, still, like every sound was being held back by the sand. We unpacked, made dinner on the little stove, and watched the sun melt into the horizon. Later, we sat under the stars, drinking cheap boxed wine and talking about everything, school, boys, where we saw ourselves in 5 years, all the usual late-night stuff. I remember saying, "This is exactly what I needed." Saf smiled and nodded. Same. The next day, we explored. There wasn't much to explore. Really, just empty land, a couple distant structures that might have been abandoned homes or art installations, and a dried-up creek bed. But we didn't mind. It was hot, seriously hot, but freeing. I hadn't seen another person since we arrived. There were no cars, no voices, no signs of life. That kind of isolation felt almost sacred. I even wandered around the yurt topless for a bit, just because I could. We were surrounded by nothing. Who would see? That night, I slept naked. It was too hot not to. Somewhere around 10 p.m., we heard music. Faint at first, just a distant thump of bass, but it grew louder. At first we assumed someone was having a party in the next town over. The sound carried strangely in the desert, bouncing and warping through the dry air. We joked about it, danced a little to the ghostly beat, and then the music stopped. I fell asleep not long after. But Saf didn't. Later, she told me she had been lying awake when she heard voices. Two men talking. Close. Too close. At first it was just murmuring, but it got louder until she could hear what they were saying. I think that's it. You sure? Yeah. Two girls. Saw the car out front. Shoes too. That's when she knew something was wrong. They were outside. She shook me, but I didn't wake. She whispered my name, pinched my arm, tried again. Eventually, I gasped awake, heart pounding, not even sure what had pulled me out of sleep. But when I looked up and saw the look on her face, wide-eyed, finger pressed to her lips, I knew it was bad. We didn't speak. We couldn't. The yurt was made of canvas stretched over wood. It wasn't soundproof. It wasn't anything proof. Every creak of the bed echoed like a gunshot. I tried to breathe slowly. Tried not to cry. Outside, we heard them walking. Their footsteps crunched in the dirt, slow and deliberate. One of them stomped, hard, circling the yurt. We later figured that must have been the sound I'd misheard in my sleep as galloping. I thought it was wildlife. I was wrong. Then came the flashlight. A beam of light moved across the canvas wall, sweeping slowly. It paused near the zipper. I saw the shadow of a hand. The light turned off. We clutched our phones, brightness turned all the way down. We used the Notes app to communicate. Saf typed, "I'm texting 911. I nodded. She sent the message, describing our location as best she could. Off-grid yurt in Wonder Valley, 10 minutes from main road, near Twisted Joshua Tree. The dispatcher responded, but said they couldn't send someone without a formal address. We begged. We explained. They refused. The flashlight returned. Closer this time. I felt helpless. My taser, my pepper spray, even my panic alarm, they were all in my bag by the door. I had nothing under my pillow. Nothing but fear. I remember thinking, I'm gonna die like this. Naked in a yurt in the middle of the desert. No one's going to find us until we've already been buried in the sand. I imagined my parents getting the call. I thought of the funeral. I felt this strange, quiet guilt. The hand returned to the zipper. This time it rattled. That was it. I moved. I leapt out of bed, scrambled across the yurt, grabbed my bag. I fumbled for the taser, turned it on, and pressed the panic alarm. It screamed into the darkness. At the same time, Saf called 911, this time on speaker. We have a taser, and the police are coming. I shouted. The footsteps paused, and then finally we heard it. A siren. Faint at first, but growing louder. Closer. The men ran. We didn't see them. We just heard the crunch of footsteps retreating into the night. We stayed where we were, shaking and crying, until the police arrived. The responding officer was calm, almost too calm. He told us we shouldn't be staying so far off the road, that it was easy to get lost out here. We just nodded. What else could we say? We packed in silence. I'd never moved so fast in my life. As we were zipping up the last bag, Saf pointed to the sand near the yurt. Those weren't there before, she said. Footprints. Huge ones. No tread, no shoes. Just bare feet. Deep and wide. I put my hand next to one. It dwarfed mine. I took pictures. I still have them. I don't know why. The officer told us they were probably his own prints. Or maybe from the search dogs. But these were fresh. And they were inches from the yurt. We'd only used the front entrance, stepping over the ring of decorative rocks. But these prints were inside the ring. Right up against the canvas. I didn't sleep that night. We drove home in silence, the adrenaline still in our veins. When we got back to my house, we curled up on the couch with stuffed animals and didn't speak for hours. We were both in our 20s, but that night, we felt like scared little kids. The next morning, I walked her to her car. That's when I saw them. Handprints. All over my car. Not just one or two. Dozens. Smudged in brown dirt. Some big, some small. Some on the windows. Some on the roof. Some on the hood. No one had touched my car since we'd arrived. It had been parked next to the yurt. I took more pictures. We later learned that there had been a series of disappearances in Wonder Valley that year. Young women mostly. Tourists. The kind of stories that never quite made the national news, but lived in local legend. Saf started researching. She found articles, names, coordinates. We pulled up a map. Every single disappearance had happened within a few miles of our yurt. I want to say this had a clean ending, that the men were caught, that justice was served. But we never heard anything more. No arrests. No updates. Just silence. This all happened about 2 years ago, when I was 19. Not that long ago, but somehow it feels like a different lifetime now. Back then, I had just finished my second year of university, and finally moved out of the dorms. Me and 5 of my friends decided to rent a flat together. Our first real place. No more student accommodation with shared toilets and mystery fridge mold. This was real life. Or so we thought. The flat was in an older building, kind of a converted townhouse that had been chopped into different apartments. Ours was the basement unit, technically ground level, but sunken enough that our windows looked out just above the street. It was cozy, with exposed brick in some rooms and creaky wooden floors, and it had this slightly musty smell that never went away no matter how many candles we burned. Still, we were in love with it. It was ours. The night we moved in, it was just me, my friend Lyra, one of the other girls I was closest with, and my boyfriend Dren. The rest of our roommates were away, some on summer trips, some visiting family, and they wouldn't be back for another 2 weeks. So the first night, it was just the 3 of us. We had boxes everywhere, the air was thick with excitement and pizza grease, and we were all a little high and a lot lazy. Lyra went off to set up her room, and Dren and I stayed in mine, lying on the mattress we'd thrown on the floor, watching old kung fu movies and passing a joint back and forth. The windows were cracked open a few inches to let in some air. It was hot, humid, and the whole place still smelled like paint and dust. It was sometime after midnight when I noticed him. Outside our window. A man. Just pacing. Right in front of our flat. Now, our windows were ground level, meaning that if you stood outside, you could easily look in. And this guy, he kept trying to do exactly that. He'd walk past, stop, lean a little toward the glass, and then keep going. Back and forth. Back and forth. He was huge. Easily 6 feet 4, maybe pushing 300 pounds. He had this heavy, lumbering walk and a shaved head that gleamed under the street lamp like polished marble. He wore a gray hoodie and jeans, and something about him just didn't sit right. He didn't look angry. Just determined. I whispered to Dren, "That guy's been walking past our window for like 5 minutes." Dren sat up slowly, peering through the blinds. "Yeah, that's weird." We both tried to brush it off. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was just lost. But still, we made sure the windows were locked. I pulled the curtain closed, and we tried to ignore it. 20 minutes later, Lyra burst into my room, eyes wide, whisper shouting, "There's a man in the hallway." I sat up so fast I nearly knocked over the lamp. "What do you mean in the hallway?" "I think we left the front door unlocked," she said. "He's inside." Dren froze. I could see the calculation in his eyes. We both got up and crept into the hallway, Lyra just behind us. And there he was. The same guy from the window, standing inside our flat. Right there in our hallway. He was even bigger up close. He had a bulky frame, and this way of standing that made him look like he was trying to fill the entire doorway. He wasn't saying anything, just looking at us like he was trying to figure something out. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I expected. The man blinked, like he hadn't expected to be confronted. "I'm looking for my girlfriend," he said, pulling out a phone. "She lives here." "No," I said. "She doesn't." He turned the phone toward us and showed us a text message from an unsaved number. It just had our address and the words "people inside." Nothing else. "I got this," he said. "She said she was here." Lyra and I looked at each other, then back at him. "No one here is your girlfriend," Lyra said. "You need to leave." He frowned. "I'll call her." He stepped back slightly, turned the phone to low volume, and dialed. We could hear the voice on the other end. It was a man. Not a woman. Definitely not a girlfriend. I didn't wait for any more of his excuses. "You need to leave now," I said louder this time. He looked at us, eyes narrowing slightly. But then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Okay." He turned and walked out the door. We locked it immediately. We were all shaking. Dren kept pacing the room, muttering, "What the was that?" Lyra was clutching her phone, already texting our upstairs neighbors. 3 people we'd just met earlier that day when we moved in. Charlotte, Matt, and Rob. They came down a few minutes later. Rob especially looked pissed. He listened to the story, arms crossed, then said, "That guy came to our place too." Apparently, the same man had knocked on their door earlier that night, insisting his girlfriend lived upstairs. When they told him to leave, he got aggressive. Rob, who was this tall, wiry guy with a shaved head and a no-nonsense attitude, grabbed a kitchen knife and told the guy he'd gut him if he ever came back. The big man left, but we weren't convinced he was gone for good. Over the next few weeks, we'd spot him near the building, just far enough away to not be trespassing. Once, I saw him across the street, leaning against a lamppost, watching our door. Another time, Lyra swore she saw him duck behind a car as she was walking home. We kept the doors locked 24/7 after that. I bought a doorstop alarm. Rob said he was sleeping with a bat beside his bed. Dren ordered a set of security cameras off eBay and installed one above our door. And then one night, I woke up to a soft scratching at the window. I sat up, heart pounding. The curtains were drawn, but the noise continued, scrape, scrape, scrape. I didn't want to look. I reached for my phone, texting Dren, who was in the next room over. 1:47 a.m. Me. Window scratching. I think he's back. Dren didn't reply, but a few seconds later I heard footsteps in the hall. Quiet ones. I cracked my door open and saw him standing in front of the curtain, holding a flashlight. He yanked it open. Nothing. Just the dark street. A few leaves brushing against the glass. No sign of the stranger. But when we checked the footage from the security cam the next morning, we saw him. He'd come to the door, tried the knob, stood there for a minute, then walked around the side of the building. Right toward my window. That was the last time we saw him. We never found out who he was. Never figured out who sent the text or why he picked our building. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone gave him the wrong address. Or maybe he was just looking for a place to get inside. Somewhere with young girls and no locks. To the man who walked into our house with a lie and a phone call. Let's not meet again.